The final step. Let's put it all together right here at the Voice of College Football and check out the most popular brands in college football, the most popular games, and the ones that you wanted to watch in 2022 right here at the Voice of College Football. Please like the video. Even if you don't agree with me, please like the video. If you enjoy the conversation and want to keep it going, best discussion, debate, and analysis right here on college football. Please, of course, subscribe as well. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. We started the series with the Pac-12. Why? Because the Pac-12 is struggling, striving, doing all it can to strike the best deal of a media rights contract for 2024 and beyond. And, of course, then we looked at the Big 12. The ACC, how did the SEC compare? We looked at the SEC and the Big 10 as well. Now let's put it all together and compare all the conferences and who did you watch and how much did you watch of each conference. If you enjoy this series, and many of you have commented that you do, please get us to the 10,000 mark in terms of views, and we will continue the series. We could break down each and every team. We can look at the last 5 years. And so let us know what you want to see and support the video series with 10,000 views. Or if we get 500 likes, I will take your requests and we will continue the series right here at the Voice of College Football. Let's look at the top non-conference games for 2022. Texas, Alabama nudged Ohio State and Notre Dame as the most watched game of non-conference play in 2022. Bama, Texas aired on Fox, Ohio State, Notre Dame on ABC. Then there's a drop-off. And ironically, we've got two Florida State games on the opening weekend of the season against LSU and on the final weekend of the season against the Florida Gators. Impressive by the Seminoles that people were watching them play football, but let's also keep in mind, those games had no competition, none at all. They were the single event in college football on a Sunday night on Labor Day weekend and then also on Thanksgiving weekend on the Friday night. So those are impressive, but no competition in those windows. Then we see USC Notre Dame on the final weekend of the season. Georgia, Oregon, of course, open the season. So we've got big non-conference games to open the season and close the season. And then you see the rest of the matchups there. The SEC fills 6 of these spots. The Big 10 for the ACC, 3, the Pac-12 with 3 teams that factored into the top 10 games. The Big 12 with 1, and Notre Dame showed up, of course, with that number 2 game. Now let's go to the top conference games of 2022, and we're going to go 50 deep to give you a very exhaustive look right here. And the top game by far was Ohio State and Michigan, of course, playing for the Big Ten Championship appearance. 17+ million watch the Buckeyes and the Wolverines, as this is typically the most watched game in college football, even when these teams are down, let alone when they're competing for a college football playoff berth and a Big Ten Championship. Georgia, Tennessee, the only other game over 13 million. There you see the SEC dominance with Bama, Tennessee, Bama, Ole Miss playing on CBS. So games number 2 and 3 and 4, all CBS games. Then Ohio State pops back into the top 5 with a date against Penn State in Happy Valley. Then also factoring into these games is not only the popularity of the brand and how good they are, because big games draw viewers, but of course also what networks they're on, and also how good are the games, because you can have a really good matchup, and then once it gets into the fourth quarter, if it's a 21-point game, then people are tuning out and the rating suffers. But still all the notable games that you could imagine. Bama, LSU, Texas A&M and Bama, Ohio State, Maryland. That's a bit of a surprise, but of course that was a close game. Get this, the top 15 conference games in terms of TV ratings, SEC and Big Ten, all of them. The top game in terms of TV viewers, not SEC and Big Ten, was TCU and Texas out of the Big 12 at number 16 at just over 5 million on ABC. Then we see a slot behind the top-rated game in the ACC in terms of an in-conference game. Clemson and North Carolina State on ABC at just under 5 million viewers. And then the SEC continues to dominate, as well as the Big Ten. Consider an Ohio State-Northwestern game at noon Eastern time. Northwestern, they were 1-11. 4.76 million viewers, the 20th highest-rated game in terms of conference games in all of college football in 2022. As I glance through some of these games, there are some classics and there are some dogs. Ohio State crushed Wisconsin and Michigan State. Those games were not competitive past the first quarter, and still people watched them. Syracuse scared Clemson, and almost 5 million people watched that game on ABC. You've got Nebraska and Northwestern. Also keep in mind, much like the Florida State examples earlier, Nebraska and Northwestern played in week 0 on Fox. They had no competition, so a lot of people watched that game, of course, because they had no other college football to watch. We see the Big Ten prominent, Ohio State, Iowa, even though, again, that was a blowout in the second half. Michigan, Maryland was a pretty competitive game with over 4 million viewers. TCU factors into these ratings more than they typically would for a lot of good reasons. Obviously, they were playing close, exciting games. They had a lot of exciting comebacks. And then on top of that, of course, they were playing for a college football playoff berth. Michigan, Indiana, Michigan, Nebraska were not good games, not competitive games, but still the Michigan brand brings in viewers. Oregon State shows up, and that's good for the Beavers. They finished at 10-3 and had their best season in a long, long time. And the Civil War matchup with Oregon was an exciting game and the second rated game in the Pac-12 at 3.56 million, only surpassed by USC and UCLA on Fox. There you see Penn State show up against Minnesota and Purdue. That Purdue game was on Fox on an opening Thursday night at 3.5 million viewers, along with Arkansas and Texas A&M. Clemson and Florida State, one of the big games every year in the ACC, and with Florida State coming back and posting their best season since 2016, of course, people showed up to watch the game. And we round out the top 50 with 2 Kansas State games against Oklahoma State and Oklahoma. So when we look at the top 50 conference games for 2022, we see that the SEC and the Big Ten split them, 18 each. We see that the Big 12 had 6 at the top 50, and the top-rated game for the Big 12 was at number 15 in the rankings. The ACC had 5 at the top 50, and the Pac-12 comes in with 3, and the highest-rated game from the Pac-12 was USC and UCLA at number 23. In terms of network representation in the top 50, we've got Fox with 15, ABC with 15, and with 5 at the top 17. CBS was dominant, only 12 compared to 15 each for ABC and Fox, but 3 of the top 4 and 7 of the top 12, and then ESPN with 8 of the top 50. Now let's check out each individual network of the big networks and see their top-rated games, and we start with ESPN. And for the worldwide leader, we've got 8 SEC games out of the top 10. We've got 1 from the ACC and 1 a matchup between the SEC and the ACC. And then, of course, a game we already talked about, that closing weekend game, Florida State and Florida on a Friday night, and a really entertaining 1-touchdown game with 6.7 million viewers. Let's move it on to Fox's top 10. And yes, that's that number that just completely dwarfs everything else at over 17 million. Ohio State, Michigan. We got Bama, Texas. We talked about that. Ohio State, Penn State, and on down the line. Some notable games would involve a lot of Big Ten here, with 6 from the Big Ten, 2 from the Big 12, 1 from the Pac-12, and a matchup between the Big 12 and the SEC, of course. That was Bama and Texas. Now let's move it on to ABC, and it might surprise some people that because of the Fox agreement and that attachment with the Big Ten and those two brands being so linked in people's minds, that actually the Big Ten did extremely well in 2022 on ABC. And of course, those two entities have been together since the beginning of college football on television, and that's going to end. But Ohio State and Notre Dame, of course, on the opening Saturday night with a huge rating. And then we've got a bit of a drop-off. We talked about most of these games. Non-conference games comprise 4 of the top 5 games. Ohio State, Maryland, again, that a bit of a surprise, but the Buckeyes always bring eyeballs. Plus, that was a good football game. Michigan State was not a good game, but still over 5 million viewers as people check out that rivalry. Michigan, Illinois was a really good game, surprisingly, despite a 3-touchdown spread there. TCU, Texas, and then we finish up with Clemson, North Carolina State, and Ohio State Northwestern was the 10th highest rated game on ABC in 2022, surprisingly. Now let's move it on to FS1, where the highest rated game by far, by about 20%, is Penn State and Michigan State at basically 2 million people watching the game. And then there's a ton of Big 12 with Oklahoma State, Texas Tech on down the line. Actually, 7 of those top 10 games from the Big 12, 2 from the Big 10, and then there's another matchup involving a Big 10 team, Nebraska and Georgia Southern at 1.24 million, the 6th highest rated game on FS1. ESPN2 is always an interesting grab bag because we mentioned the Louisville UCF game, a bit of a surprise there, but again, it was isolated on a Friday night, so everybody that watched college football was watching that game. Texas A&M Out State normally wouldn't get a great viewership, but people were learning during the course of that game, hey, let's flip to ESPN2. Texas A&M's about to get upset, and that proved to be the second highest rated game on ESPN2 in 2022. Michigan State, Western Michigan, they also played on a Friday night with little competition there. The Syracuse-Purdue game was an amazing game. I guarantee that that rating jumped significantly in the fourth quarter as that was just a shootout. Then we've got a number of other games factoring in, and we see where the TV ratings and the viewership for ESPN2 is well below the other networks and kind of on par with FS1 to a certain extent, and a lot of representation from the American Conference with 3 teams there, the ACC with 4, and we're all over the place, and even the MAC chimes in with 1 appearance, that Western Michigan game against Michigan State, but of course the Spartans, I'm sure, were the draw. How about the Big Ten Network closing out with Nebraska and Iowa, and the significance there was the Hawkeyes had to win the game to go to the Big Ten championship game. They lost. So the Big Ten Network had a big game on the final weekend of the season. And again, Ohio State and Rutgers, even though it was an awful game, drew the most folks. Michigan and Rutgers as well. And you see on down the line as 6 at the top 10, and I included a few more games there. And it always surprises me because you've got some bad games at the top between Michigan and Rutgers and Ohio State and Rutgers, and obviously the brands of Ohio State and Michigan are bringing the folks to the TV because you've got better matchups down at the bottom of the top 10, games that were extremely meaningful in the Big Ten Western Division, like Michigan State, Illinois. The Illini were playing for a division championship, and also Iowa, Illinois, but those games lightly watched. The CBS SEC partnership has been going on for decades, and CBS has garnered some amazing ratings because of America's best playing football conference and arguably the most popular, and the TV ratings were great for CBS. They had, again, 3 of the top 4 games in terms of conference games, and we see the top 10 coming in from CBS, and of course they're all SEC games as they feature that conference each and every week. What games on what networks from a national perspective did you not watch? Raise your hand if you watched any of these games because you were kind of alone. So what we did here is we broke down the games that were the lowest rated, lowest viewed on each network by a Power 5 team. So there were less viewed games on all these networks, but by group of 5 teams. So these are strictly Power 5 teams and also new Power 5. So we want to look at BYU, Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati coming into the Power 5. And also we included some proposed Power 5 teams. So if it was San Diego State or SMU, we also included those games as well. Of course, the numbers are going to still be higher on ESPN, so their lowest rated games are still going to be much better than these other networks. And then, of course, Fox right there as well. And then when we get to ESPNU in particular, we're going to see some low ratings. And when you get matchups like Illinois and Chattanooga on BTN at 176,000, and how about this one when we go all the way down to the bottom of the rack? Now, when we go to the bottom, the very bottom rung of college football in terms of network games. Now, again, this does not include the ACC network, the Pac-12, or the SEC, but I got to think this is probably, in terms of network games, nobody was watching this one. Mizzou and New Mexico State on ESPNU, the lowest rated network game that we could find, and we did an exhaustive search, 63,000 folks, and you most likely did not watch the Tigers and New Mexico State. When talking television and college football, a lot of controversy surrounds Notre Dame. Should they join a conference? Will they make more money when they join a conference? All right, well, of course they do just fine by themselves. It's been estimated that they would make more money by joining a conference, but they don't want to, and they're doing just fine without it. Of course, their home games are on NBC, and then they've got a smattering of games mostly on ABC, in terms of their road games and their ACC contracts. So let's check out Notre Dame in the TV ratings. And we've seen some of these games because they did extremely well in taking on Ohio State as one of the top rated games of the year in Columbus in week 1. And then to bookend the season, it was Notre Dame against USC. And that ranked with over 6 million views as well. So if you look at the rest of the ABC games, the North Carolina game did pretty well. Syracuse about 1 million less. The Navy game, of course, even though it got pretty tight at the end of and then you got the Navy game that got just over 2 million views and was the 9th rated game for Notre Dame. All right, all of these games, 11 of 12, included here, excluding Notre Dame's matchup against UNLV. There you see the NBC games. They've got a pretty stable viewership of about 2.5 million people, it seems, regardless of who they play. Of course, that Clemson game was huge. It was a blowout, not a really good game, but Notre Dame won, and so the Notre Dame faithful are going to watch that game all the way through at 3.22 million. And then the Cal game went down to the wire. The Stanford game was an upset loss. The Marshall game was an upset loss as well. And again, it seems like Notre Dame pretty much on NBC is going to get 2.5 million views, except for Boston College. Nobody watched Boston College play, and they were a pretty bad football team at 3-9. We have sliced up the college football viewership one more way, and I really enjoy this one, so check it out for 2022. In terms of million marker milestones. Okay, one game had 17 million views. We know that game. There were two games that had over 13 million views between the Big Ten and the SEC. Okay, then when you go to 11 million, SEC and the Big Ten, there you see the split at 2-1. Okay, 10 million views. We finally get some other conferences involved here. The SEC had 3 games at 10 million views, the Big Ten at 2, and the Big 12 and Notre Dame at 1 each. And, of course, that Big 12 game was Texas and Alabama. Let's go to 8 million, and this is going to start to become a little bit more meaningful and a little bit more interesting. Well, the SEC leads the Big Ten with games over 8 million viewers, 4-3. There you see the Big 12 and Notre Dame. Again, that's the Ohio State matchup. 7 million. It's the SEC at 7-3 over the Big 10, so the SEC looking really good there. When we drop it to 6 million views, that threshold, again, the SEC doubling up the Big 10, everybody else falling behind. Then we go to 5 million. And again, these are extremely highly rated games when you consider there's only, 20, 22, 24, 26, 27 games out of the hundreds of played on network television. So this is a great rating, and consider that the highest rated game in the Big 12 still just had barely over 5 million viewers with TCU and Texas. So the SEC leads the Big 10 with games of over 5 million viewers, 13-7. Then if we go to 4 million, well, the Big 10 starts to catch up with a lot of viewership between 4 and 5 million. A lot of games for the Big 10, Northwestern Nebraska and Ohio State, Iowa, and others were between 4 and 5 million viewers. So the SEC's lead shrinks to 20-16. There you see the Big 12 with 5 and the ACC with 4. And then our final barometer is at the 3 million mark. And you can see where the numbers swell. So a lot of decent games, really good games, really important games, but not the top of the line marquee matchups, get 3 to 4 to 5 million viewers. And so our final marker is the 3 million mark, and the SEC leads the Big 10 31-24, and they're both way out ahead of everybody else, with the Big 12 at 11, the ACC at 10. 4 Notre Dame games got at least 3 million viewers. That's our look at TV viewership for 2022 in college football. Again, get us to 500 likes, or more importantly, to 10,000 views on this video, and we will continue the series. We could look at Alabama for the last 5 years, Ohio State, whomever. We could compare Ohio State and Michigan, Alabama, Auburn. We could run through the SEC. We can do all sorts of things. We don't have to stick to 2022. You give me your request and we will fulfill it. Again, we want to get to 10,000 on this video. Please help us do that. Share the videos out on social media and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football.